I have got good news for you and bad news. The good news is that women are entering higher education in larger numbers than ever before, right? You've probably heard that. It's been in the news quite a bit. And not only that, but women are doing incredibly well academically in those programs. But I've got some bad news for you. And the bad news isn't showing up in the headlines. It's showing up in the spaces in between those relatively superficial statistics about enrollment numbers and grades. The bad news story is showing up in the conversations that women are having about their higher education experiences. I get to hear it a lot because the work I do is helping women play bigger in the world, play bigger in their careers, share their voices and their radical questions and their ideas. And in those conversations, I've started to hear a troubling theme. It sounds something like this. College actually left me feeling less confident than I felt when I started. Graduate school shredded my ego. I am grappling with self-doubt in a way that I never did before. So this is what I want to open up our conversation about today, a closer look at what is really happening for young women in higher education. And this is a particularly important moment for us to be talking about this. My mother's generation did an incredible job giving women equal access to participate in the institutions of power in our society. They fought for the right for me, for you, to participate in universities, to participate in the professions, to hold political office, to open a checking account in our name. They did an incredible job. But there was a second part of the work, and it wasn't about participation. It was about transformation. It was about transforming those institutions of power so that they were more humane and more loving and more sane and more sustainable for all of us. And that work, we all know, is very unfinished. So if the work of women of our time is to transform, are we getting the kind of education that will help us do that? Are we getting the education that helps us trust our own ideas and visions for change? Or is all this higher education that we're getting, that we're celebrating so much, actually causing us to trust our own voices less? That's the question I want us to think about today. I heard these words from Tracy Clark. Tracy is a brilliant photography artist. She runs a thriving business as an artist, and she also teaches photography to women around the world. And her work is all about showing the beauty in the mundane every day, and particularly the beauty in the mundane domestic sphere that is what makes up so many families' lives and women's lives. And that's always been what she tried to show in her work. So when Tracy went off to get her art degree and showed that work to her professors, they didn't really talk to her about composition or how she could improve her technique. They said this: there's no room for that here. It's not important. What's important is making a big political statement with your work, addressing something heavy and dark and weighty. This is sentimental and saccharine. These are words that I heard from Andrea. Andrea went to one of the top educational institutions in the United States, and when the time came to write her thesis, she learned that the professor that was assigned to her to read that thesis was a world-renowned scholar in the field, and she was so excited. And Andrea's thesis was a little bit radical because it talked about a major poet and the influence of that poet's lover on his work. Well, when the comments came back, one of them was this: "It is unbecoming of an undergraduate to make that kind of assertion." And Andrea felt embarrassed and confused. What could you say that's unbecoming, that's over the line, that's unattractive? Those words stuck with her for a long time. And when I heard these stories, I felt the tinge in my chest, because I remember when I arrived at college and I got my first assignment to write an essay about an experience that had been significant in my life. And I thought, I'm going to write all about my childhood dance classes. I had danced at the same studio from age 5 to 18, and this place was my safe place, my sacred place, and I was going to try and express all of that in an essay. And when the paper came back, there was red pen all over it, and the teacher said something about what wasn't right about it, and it seemed a little sentimental. That was it. How does this happen? Are these teachers mean? Are they just wildly insensitive? Absolutely not. These are some words from Clara. She is a law professor. She says, my friends and I talk about with our PhDs, we didn't even get the degree in what we were actually studying. We got a degree in surviving. It was like a hazing. These are words from Lynn. She's a tenured professor. She talks about how exhausting it is to keep having ideas and then defending them in an atmosphere of attack, not an atmosphere of intellectual rigor, but an atmosphere of attack, and to have to defend them against people who have really damaged egos themselves. So you can understand the system, the cycle, the ecology here. We put people through a hazing that we call a PhD program. We put them in a very negative, difficult milieu. And then we think those people will be great ones to receive and develop the ideas of our young people and inspire them to be leaders. What's missing? I think reverence. I think when a young person raises their hand and says, I have a question, here's what I think. Or when a young person takes the risk to come up with an original idea or a thesis, that is expression of all that is sacred and divine. And it should be received just that way. I think there's a way to teach and have academic rigor and teach craft and refine thinking while all the while holding students and their ideas with reverence. But there's something else that's even deeper than how students and their professors interact. Something deeper that I think is getting in the way of women becoming those transformational leaders. And that's what I call outside in or inside out. And it has to do with the fact that the very, very, very most fundamental premise of education is this. I learn something from the outside. I read a book. I listen to a lecture. I read an article. I take that outside information into me, and if I digest it well and I master it, then I'll have something to say. Then I'll know that subject. Then I'll have something good to write on the test. Then I'll be able to write a paper about it. Or then if I've studied a lot of it, I'll be able to get a job and contribute in my career in that field. There's a problem with this. You can't condition a brain every day of its life, from the beginning of kindergarten, for 20 years following, that what you have to contribute is based on what you just learned. And then expect that same mind at some point to shift over and say, now I am enough. I've got enough inside. I can say something whether I've got a PhD in it or not. I might know something that is actually in conflict with that outside information, and it could still be true. If we want women and men to transform the systems as they are, we've got to start teaching students that what is in them constitutes their contribution as much as what they could ever learn. Their innate abilities, their natural questions, that natural "no, I don't think so" that arises in so many of us when we see injustice, when we know things could be a better way. What's in us shapes our contribution as much as what we've learned from the outside. How can we shift our education system so it teaches that? And third, I want to speak about a troubling equivalence between being a good girl and being a good student. So while we're all very busy celebrating the great grades that girls are getting, I'm a little concerned. These are words from Allison. She went to one of the top colleges in the United States, and she said, in college, what I learned confirmed what I had been trained in all along, that you got to be the good girl and the people pleaser to succeed. So let's think about what it means to be a good girl. It means you don't rock the boat, you pretty much obey the authority figure, you don't speak out of turn, you follow the rules, you also do a really good job. When you listen to students who are being educated in a conventional environment talk about how they've learned to succeed in school, it sounds a lot like that. I figure out what the authority figure in that class, the teacher, wants from me. I shape and mold myself to provide that. I follow their rules. I do what I'm asked. I'm quiet when I'm told to be quiet. I trust the information I'm getting from the outside more than anything I might be hearing in here. How can we teach so that good students, good women students, aren't just being good girls, but they're actually learning how to take risks, how to question authority, how to find new authorities, how to know there is no one authority, how to jump into action, whether they feel ready or not. All right, well, let's talk about why it matters. It matters most fundamentally because we now know some new things about the brain. We know that when we feel afraid or when we feel embarrassed, those emotions actually interfere with our limbic brain's ability to learn. We can't store memories in the same way if we're feeling afraid or embarrassed. So if students are having experiences like Tracy or Andrea had, and they come to feel afraid, they come to feel afraid of what could happen when they share their ideas, they come to feel the potential for embarrassment is always there, they simply can't learn. It matters because we all are affected by the leaders coming out of college and graduate school. College and graduate school have become the socialization experience that young people go through that prepares them for the world. It's not enough that they're mastering a domain of knowledge, that they're learning great critical thinking skills. We need them to learn in those environments how to become transformational leaders. And I think it matters most of all because academia, though it may seem removed from our everyday lives, is where the very notion of reality gets shaped. It's in the history department where historians are deciding what questions will get researched and what won't, will ultimately be the story of our history we all know. What story will be told? And it's in the psychology department that academics are determining what questions are we going to ask about our own minds and hearts? What are we going to actually research? The research that's being done shapes what we know to be reality. And if the culture of academia is preventing women from trusting their different voice, trusting their radical questions, trusting their ideas, the very reality we all know will be so deeply impoverished as a result. So let's look in the spaces in between. Let's each continue this conversation in our own lives to not be satisfied with women's participation in higher education, but to look for what will help us develop them into the transformational leaders we need. Thank you.